Hello, everybody. It is 2 o'clock on the nose. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to have you all here. Myself, Lorraine, Ty, Colleen, and Lauren are here. We're all going to be with you today for this workshop, and we are part of the Open Science Cluster. And we're very excited to be here at ESIP to collaborate with you all and further our knowledge on open science. So what can you expect today? What do you want to take, or what are we hoping you take away from this session? We're looking to submit an abstract to AGU, which we have, I believe, 7 days to do, about the journey of this cluster in open science. This cluster started, I believe it was 2022 in January. How many here have been part of this cluster since then? 2 of us. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody else. And I see a few familiar faces that attend the monthly meetings, so thank you for being here for that. So we are really looking to prepare a community paper. So we'll start with the abstract and a session, hopefully, at AGU, and then carry it on, because I think we've really been seeing a movement in open science, and we want to increase awareness about it so that we can all collectively work together. And I feel that going through the open science path is a way that we can embrace and collaborate and get our research out there faster, because to tackle the Earth's challenges that we're faced with today, we're going to need everybody coming together and working together. Am I unmuted? Okay, and sorry about being muted. We'll get it right eventually. So one of the things, as I was saying, that we want to have an outcome from this workshop and our cluster is to have a submission to AGU, particularly this session in open science, so that we can tell our story, how we're progressing over time with this cluster. And if others have other open science sessions that may be of interest to this group as well, please do let us know that. We're going to talk a bit, I'll go over the agenda, what we're going to be doing in the workshop, but it will be a bit of an interactive session. Don't get too worried. We want participation and everybody to collaborate with us. We good? What now? Good gosh. Okay.
We'll get it eventually.
We're keep. Are we good? Okay, now we have video, voice, and slides. What more does the online team work? We'll give you a big hug too. Okay. I'm not going to repeat this one. I'm going to move off this slide. Oh, now I can't advance. Okay. My goodness, my PhD is in physics, and sometimes I can't do the most basic things. It seems crazy. All right, so we'll give a bit of an introduction to the session. One of the things, since only 2 of us had been in the Open Science Cluster since its beginning, we will share with you a mind map that is on a piece of paper that we created 2 years ago at ESIP. So it was an interactive session, and I think we had 30 plus folks in the room that helped create that mind map. And that was after about 6 months of open science meetings. We were trying to determine what is open science, what parts are important, that sort of thing, because it was just starting to become a theme. I'm the director of Earth Sciences Solutions at Esri, and I travel the globe and meet with a lot of scientists around the globe, and open science has been a hot topic for about 5 years. I've been at events where it's been a heated topic. I've noticed the heat, more passion in that folks are starting to embrace it more in the last couple of years. And many of you are probably aware that in January of 2023, 12 federal agencies embraced the Year of Open Science. And so last year we saw a lot of activities on open science, which really started to increase awareness. So that's very near and dear to my heart. So we will look at the mind map. We're then going to have, we'll have some Slido participation. I see lots of laptops. Some folks can use your cell phones and whatnot to partake in that. And then we will have breakout sessions. And my colleague Colleen will explain about those in a moment. Now for the famous mind map. Look at that. Isn't that a piece of work? And these were themes that were coming through. Mostly about interdisciplinary work, working across boundaries, sharing, things like increase in public data so that more scientists could have access to data, also getting your research and your stories out to the public, as well as the increasing ability for incentives to be able to publish. Back when I did my PhD, I'm not going to date myself, but it was not yesterday, that's for sure. And we held everything so tight. I mean, you know, when you're doing your PhD, you have to publish a few papers, and you certainly didn't even talk about it at conferences until it was published. That's how secret it was, which was ridiculous if I think about that today. But today we are now collaborating across boundaries, and we're able to move faster in our research. And the building blocks are helping us all to move forward faster. Other things that we were talking about was the improvement in data quality, the documentation, being able to upload code to places like GitHub, making it accessible. The FAIR principles were very prominent, even a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago. So all of these things, where are we at today in moving forward with open science? And we've come up with 5 pillars that we actually did a survey to the ESIP community as part of our open science cluster to get what matters to this group in moving forward. And those 5 pillars, Colleen's going to go into some detail about those soon, will be what we're going to have little breakout sessions and flush them out a little bit more. We're not starting from scratch. We have papers of a one-page sheet for each of the 5 pillars. They're also in the Google Docs. And we will have a little description, some questions just to get us all started on collaborating on what's important in each of those pillars. And you don't have to, once we go to breakout sessions, you don't have to go into one session. You can switch halfway if something else resonates with you. So we want this to be movable, getting your ideas across, and interactive. And so that we're not just sitting and listening all the time, we're actually engaging. And so these are the 5 pillars. So project planning, data generation, data storage, metadata, and dissemination. And when we're talking about dissemination, we're talking about not just dissemination of data, but we're also talking about publications, open science journals, that sort of thing. So those are pillars we do want to come around and talk about. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Colleen. But before I do that, what we thought, if maybe we could have a show of hands as to what is of interest to the folks in the room with respect to these pillars. Who's interested in when you're starting project planning? Do we have anybody? A few. Okay, so that looks like a little cluster happening there. What about data generation? I'm interested in data generation. One over here. So the old school open science folks, okay. What about data storage? And in the context of open science, okay, we've got one over here. Metadata. Okay, I see some metadata folks forming. What about dissemination or publishing your research? Oh, more on that. Okay, all right. So what we want is before you get settled, I know some have your laptops open and whatnot, is we want those groups to aggregate a bit, because then we'll move into a little more descriptions on those topics. And we also will have the Google Docs where you can sign in and then you can be interactive in filling out those forms. So maybe what we could do is have data dissemination publication here. And Lauren will maybe help facilitate. Yeah, so those folks. And other folks, if you're not sure yet, you can decide later. And I know at the back was it data generation? No, that's the old date planning. Okay. Data. Okay, what about, we had a lot for metadata. I think that was in the middle. Metadata, oh, over here. Metadata over there, okay. And publication and dissemination. Right there, okay. Okay, so now we've done a little musical chairs, and you'll get an opportunity to move around a bit more too. And we will be helping visit the groups and facilitating some of these discussions as well. But to give you a little more context to each of these groups as we play musical chairs, getting a few steps in. I love it, very good. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Colleen, my partner in crime, as Lauren, our other partner in crime, helps over there, to start to go over in a little bit more detail about these individual pillars. I'm going to take it away, Colleen.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Okay, for a little bit of background, we came up with these topics from a community survey that we sent out early this year to the cluster and the general ESIP community. And then we kind of iterated on them, and then these came out as the main topics. And then on the right side, you see there sort of other topics that one can discuss for each data lifecycle stage. And then, so you're now in each of your groups. And then for each stage, you want to think of, barriers and challenges or pitfalls, mechanisms for incentives, good enough practices, and impacts of open science efforts. And you have with you one-pagers that have prompts that will help you think through these four main topics. So before we dive into this and each of this and how we can better frame the questions in terms of how we think of each of these topics, before we do that, if you are in the collaborative online document, I invite you to add in your name. And you can access that using the short link in here. So we made a little short link for the actual document, or you can access it using the folders. And so this is where we'll add most of the notes that will help us guide also in writing our abstract for AGU and then the community paper. And then a little bit later, I'll show a worksheet that each group can also add in their own notes. So as you're like brainstorming within your breakout groups. So actually, I'm gonna skip this and go back to it in a little bit. So talking about the breakout groups, so we'll have about 30 minutes. And as Lorraine mentioned a while ago, you can move around in groups. If you think, say for example, I think I've contributed as much as I can into this breakout group, and I have more that I can contribute to another breakout group, feel free to move around. And what we want you to think about is for each pillar that we mentioned, so project planning, data generation, data storage, metadata, and dissemination, think about these four topics. So I'm not going to mention them again, but and then for each group, you will have a dedicated slide in a worksheet that I'll show in a little bit here. And then for each group, you may want to assign a leader and a scribe, just so someone, to facilitate. But if it feels like it's flowing freely already, you do you. But then also someone to input your notes in the worksheet so that we can capture all of these thoughts and then put them into the community paper afterwards. So you can access those worksheet slides, again, in the same folder that this slide deck, is in. And I will, I'll show you how that worksheet looks here. Okay, so this worksheet also has a quick link to it, a short link. And so bit.ly/ESIP24 Open Science Worksheet. And then, so each slide, say for example, if you're in the project planning group, please don't forget to put who contributed to that conversation. And then you'll have a line for barriers, mechanisms for incentives, good enough practices, and impacts of open science efforts. So the idea is that you fill in each one of these bullet points for each, subtopic. And so that also exists for data generation, data storage, metadata management, and dissemination practices. And I see we have folks on Zoom. So those on Zoom will be one breakout group. And so you will decide amongst yourselves, like, which of these do you want to tackle? Or maybe you want to tackle more than one. That's all right too. So you do have a separate Zoom dedicated slide for you. So yeah, project planning, data generation. So please do fill out the Zoom version so that we don't have like overwriting each other's slides. So going back to that, I guess, do we have any questions in the setup of the breakout groups, or seems clear right now?
Also, I wanted to say, we do have pages for each of the groups printed that has the prompts. And if you want to, some folks might want to just write some information on those individual pages, and we can transcribe that later. So that is also open to you to do that as well.
Okay, we'll come back to the Slido poll in a second. But I wanted to challenge you and invite you to this kind of, I learned about this sort of way of thinking. It's called Liberating Structures, TRIZ. Who here has heard of this before or have done it before? Cool, thank you. So I actually heard of this in the Open Science Cluster. So Bruce Caron brought this up in one of our meetings, and so I credit this to him. Feel free to correct me if those of you who've heard this before, if my interpretation is slightly different, but it's a different way of thinking in terms of asking questions that have the most negative outcome or worst result. Instead of like, what should we do? It's more like, what should we, well, if, for example, the negative outcome that you're thinking of is like, how do we keep the data inaccessible? That's something that we don't want, but if we were to keep the data inaccessible, what are the things that we should do? So kind of like flipping the way of thinking. And so you list these things of how do you make your data inaccessible, and then you go through this list. So some examples: add the data on a private platform, have people pay to download, have proprietary format, place it in an obscure location. And then you evaluate each one. What are these things that you're actually doing right now, or that are being done right now for a specific topic or for a specific data set, or for your place of work or something like that. So which one of these are the status quo? Which one is already being done? And then pull out these items, create your second list of the things already being done, and then how do you now flip that one? So say, for example, okay, how can we keep the data inaccessible? Add it on a private platform. So our lab group is continuing to do this, for example. And then go through the subset and discuss what steps will help stop the unwanted items. So it's a opposite way of thinking, like, okay, we know that this is already being done. How can we stop this from being done? So say, for example, okay, our lab group is continuing to do this. What I can do to stop this is I can discuss with my supervisor the benefits of sharing our data in a public platform. So just sort of a different way of thinking about things. If it's something that you're not comfortable thinking about, that's okay too. But just I want to invite you to think in this way as you go through each of the topics. So yeah, are there any questions about that before we go to our Slido poll? No? Cool. It seems you're ready to jump into the breakout groups and the Slido poll. Okay, so let's do a bit of a Slido poll here. So you can go to Slido and type hashtag open science or scan the QR code. So right now, you should see a question that says, what do you believe are the greatest barriers to furthering open science? Money and time, unintended consequences. Okay, I'm very interested about the unintended consequences. Okay, trust, that's a big one. And we learned a lot about that this morning. Licenses, credit for work, incentives. Incentives, one of the things that we will, talk about. Committees, logistics, bureaucratic approval, time, motivation, costs, scarce funding, fear of change, yes. Ownership of a process, okay. Okay, publish or perish. Obscurity, okay. Okay, thanks for your responses. Here's another one, and maybe a good prompt also for your breakout groups. So what challenges do you face in implementing or furthering open science practices? And this is, maybe something that you can bring your answers here into your breakout groups. Changing minds, fear, cost, time, fear of misuse, time, yes. Experience, decision fatigue. Cost. Cost is very interesting because open does not equal free, right? Someone has to pay for it to be open. And the question is who? My org's approval process. So I think that's related also to the bureaucratic theme that we saw a minute ago. Technical debt. Upkeep, which is, I guess, also related to costs. Buy-in from everyone. Okay. Cost and time, the two biggest ones, which time is money. So great. Thank you all. Here's one. So this might also help you decide also which breakout groups you're going to go to. So which pillars would you prioritize for greater progress in open science? And this might be like more than one. your answer might be more than one, but we only ask you to choose one in here. We're having a race. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. For based also on the number of hands we saw today. Yep. Great. Cool. And maybe one last question, which this is, I guess, related to the others, but we just want to also know the distribution of our members here today, sector affiliation. Okay. Many folks from government and academia. Other. I'm curious what is in the other bucket, if you can like shout it out. Oh, yep. Yeah. Right. Yep. That's also, yeah, are you the user or are you the provider of the data? Yep. Cool. Well, thank you all for participating in our Slido polls. I think we are set to go into our breakout groups. If Lorraine, do you think we have more setup, or should we go ahead and go into our breakout groups? Just as a reminder, I think data dissemination was here, project planning, I think is in the back, metadata. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Sure, let me bring you the mic, sorry. Made a little maze for myself. I made this so much more complicated.
No, I'm just having a hard time like picking what group to go to because of a couple of questions. So like when I think of metadata, I think of metadata at all stages, and it's hard for me to think about that in terms of how, why you wouldn't cover it within the particular stages along the way. But then also, I also think big challenge is like the bridge between processes, like data generation to storage or storage to dissemination. So I'm having a trouble thinking of where to go. So maybe if you can just elaborate on the scope or what you're thinking about the scope is for all those. Well, just all of them, because for me, like, they're blurry lines still.
Yes, you know, with data generation, we're looking at. Oh, sorry. So with like if we think about barriers, we think like lack of awareness of best practice for data generation, lack of standardization, funding opportunities. If we think about mechanisms for incentive, how to prioritize open data practices. Looking at good enough practices, how to clearly define project objectives and data collection protocols when we think about data generation to ensure completeness of data. And yeah, with metadata,
So this one pagers too, I know we don't have enough for everyone in the room. They're also in the Google Doc, so that might help also.
yeah. So with metadata, if you think about some of the barriers would be, I was just in a session earlier and we were talking about all kinds of different data sets and the importance of metadata in order to work on multiple types of data sets when you're trying to link them together to do your research project. So that sometimes there's inconsistencies or different definitions of what location is or what is the date. One was talking about wildfire data sets and how they capture when it was actually a wildfire event. There's many different data sets have different definitions of when that would be, for example. So each of these descriptions in the Google Docs, we have some information to give you a little bit more insight, and we also have them printed. So you can have them right in front of you if you don't want to be online as well. Does that help? Sort of.
John Relf, NCEI. I think my big problem is that you can't really separate these. I mean, they are concepts and themes, but they are all interwoven in the process. So while you're doing your planning, you're planning all of these. Yeah. So at that point, it doesn't really matter which group you choose. Choose a group and we'll talk about some things. And
there you go. Any more questions? So we all good to start going? Okay.
Cool. We're exactly at 2:30, so we give it 30 minutes and we'll end about 3. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Cool.
And we'll be floating to help along the way. Thank you, everybody. Now we're going to present the summaries, and I believe each group has nominated somebody. We have the slides. So who wants to go first? Okay, we've got data dissemination group going first. Who's going to come and present? Oh, you can present right from there.
So we basically wrote an essay, and with a lot of barriers identified from different administrative approval processes, especially if you work for those large organizations that can really hinder dissemination of whatever that's data or like publication and other outputs. And there's also skewed incentive structure leading to the neglect of dissemination of certain parts of the outputs. I think we're getting to more recognizing data, but still not as the same level of publication in many organizations. And the license and copyright issues, as well as those cultural difference, can discourage the dissemination and the reuse of those outputs and data sets. And also oftentimes we are too focused on accessibility of those open data and outputs, and not necessarily enough attention to the usability of those. And you put it out doesn't mean that people know and can use it. And the last barrier is the monetary and technical infrastructure cost for the dissemination, especially in the earth science. There are those large data sets and artifacts that can be a huge barrier. And in terms of mechanisms for incentives, we identified two, but there are probably more. Feel free to add. Like one is to provide proper credits for the data and other outputs, and at the same level of the scholarly publications, and recognizing all the individuals and groups contributed in the development of those outputs during dissemination processes. And for good enough practices, we have three. I added another one, but maybe it's not there yet. Enforce the proper citation of the data and artifacts, and then also using the computational notebooks to support the usability beyond just accessibility for specific use cases, and also how to like really thoughtfully apply proper open license during dissemination to allow people from different type of organizations to be able to use it. Oftentimes, if you apply a non-commercial without giving a proper thoughts, maybe that will hinder some people in the commercial sector to use those data or the tools that may really benefits the larger groups. And for the impact of open science efforts, that includes improve the discoverability of the open data and outputs, and also help inform decision making for specific issues, and also can enhance the reproducibility and efficiency of both the past and the future research and applications.
Excellent, thank you. Can we have a round of applause for this group? Now, for this group, on the Google Docs sheet, please make sure you put your name and email address and affiliation on there. And also, what we've added to the doc sheet, we highlight our name if you want to be included in the AGU abstract submission as a co-author. So if you're interested in that, we'll be sending out an abstract once we compile all of this information. We, like I said, we have less than a week to do so, but we will be doing it. And if you're interested in being part of that authorship, please just highlight your name within the Google Docs, or the original doc that lists your name and affiliation. Okay, who wants to go next? Oh, right here. Here we go. So the planning group.
We're holding a competition for how many bullet points that we can get, and I think we're winning. All right, so we actually started with what is project planning and what do we want to consider to be in scope for this. So I'm just going to read off a couple of those. We talked about sort of who and how are decisions made on project, what's getting clarity on what the project purpose is. So thinking about why and who are we doing this for, what's the context, a vision or mission statement. Credit and responsibility, especially around authorship, sort of feeding into the roles of the project, who's doing what and why, how are they being recognized? And thinking about drafting like a charter or a governance document that has rules for engagement, both externally and then internally. How do you fight as a group? How do you hash out disagreements? And then just general statements around ethics, particularly around data ethics. So barriers to this, we found sort of time, money, and resources, just to get the perennial favorites up there. Soft skills, or how to start. So these types of project plannings, especially if you come from a more technical training, is often skipped. Let's see, the expectations, both internally and externally. I'm not going to read all of these, but I think mostly clarity around credit came up quite a bit, and sort of thinking about setting expectations. For mechanisms of incentives, my mechanism of incentive for doing open science is I can ask multidisciplinary questions on bigger projects because I've got more skills to draw on. If we can get assessment shifts in there, so credit for work, crediting hidden work, thinking about tenure assessments if you're in academia, and just broadly aligning capacities, incentives, and limitations on the project. Good enough practices, we sort of ended up hitting that a lot when we were defining what project planning was, so project planning is a good enough practice in general. But thinking about sort of ongoing updates, minimum viable products, having meetings with agendas that include notes and recaps of said meeting, being clear on why you're talking about an item on there. Are you having a brainstorming session, or did you make a decision, and does everyone know that? Active listening skills, two-way communication, clearly identifying customers versus collaborators, things along those lines. Impact, world is happy, yay, open science. But then thinking about more satisfying project results, talking about balancing process versus progress. Sometimes too much structure can really weigh down the progress of the project, so there is a sweet spot there that's different for every project. And making unexpected connections or extensions or advances. If you can have this type of ongoing communication between a diverse collaboration team, sometimes you can uncover new thinking or new results that might not have been apparent if you took the divide and conquer approach.
Thank you. And also to this group, ensure that if you want to be part of the abstract as a co-author, to highlight your name on the attendance sheet. Okay, where are we going next? Over here, okay.
So I can't tell if I'm yelling at you guys or not. The data storage group, we found a lot more barriers than probably anything else, definitely anything else. The first one is a little bit confusing, but it's archiving the executables that you might need to access the data. Sometimes executables are considered a security risk, so companies don't want to store them. Obviously cost, where do you store the data and how do you maintain it long-term? There's different tiers of access. You can have it in cold storage or where it's easily accessible, and how do you balance that? Data format, again, if the data is going to be stored for a long time, something that we use now might not be the format that people use 15, 20, 30 years from now. And how do you maintain that data so that it's usable? Disaster recovery is just a barrier in that you have to have it potentially duplicated in multiple places. Sometimes access policy, like I work with NASA, and you have to have an Earth data cloud or an Earth data login in order to get to their data, and not everybody can get an Earth data login. So that's a barrier. Access policy, oh, that's the one I just did, sorry. International policies, the US wants to store stuff in the US, India wants to store stuff in India, and they're all on different systems that might be hard for people in other countries to access. And then tools expertise, you need, oh, actually I updated that too and it didn't show, I don't know why. Anyway, it's fine. I actually moved that down to an impact of science because because we are doing open science, people have to know things that they didn't know before. They have to understand Git and Jupyter and the cloud, etc. Mechanisms for incentives, we had reuse. It's out there. The data is out there, and you can reuse data that you used before. You can use data other people put out there. The grant requirements, often they require you to make open data. So that's an incentive to do that if you want a grant. And then the availability of a long-term data set. If stuff's out there, you can get to it in the future rather than it deteriorates and nobody maintains it. Good enough policies, we felt like there needs to be a retention policy. It needs to be in a trusted repository. You need a proper granularity of data. Our data is getting larger and larger and making it so you can get the piece you need rather than the whole thing. And then basic transformation kind of goes with that, like subsetting and reformatting, reprojecting, things like that. And then for the impacts, cloud accessibility is a two-way, a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's great because you can access the cloud, but if you're not in a place that has internet service, you can't access it. And then you have to know, well, you can take advantage of the cloud infrastructure. You don't have to buy a supercomputer to do your processing. You can use one short-term.
And last but certainly, well, do we have the online?
We do, yeah.
Okay, and then we'll go to metadata.
Okay, so Ashley, our lone virtual participant, thank you so much for hanging in there with us. If you want to go ahead and give your summary.
Sorry, but if everybody can hear me okay?
If you could speak a little louder, sorry, it's just coming through a little quietly for us.
Okay, how about this?
That's much better. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, let's see if I can keep my cool presenting to a large room I can't see. But yeah, like they said, these are just a couple of bullet points from a lone perspective of somebody early in their career, somebody who doesn't necessarily know current practices very well, not a subject matter expert, but a couple of things. Let's see. So we're on project planning. Projects often under strict conditions to be for-profit or use restrictive data. A lot of research projects. There are some that are self-governing where they can choose how they want to present their results, but there's a lot of research projects that need to kind of compete for funding, and a lot of times these funds come with caveats that require either coming up with a way to generate profit from these results, or they want you to use restrictive data and not open data for these types of research. So that's one barrier for project planning to be able to bring this into the open science domain. Similarly, working with funding partners, that's along the same lines. And then down to impacts of open science, influences funding for open access publishing and data. So if project planning can work together with funding partners or data providers to be able to bring not just the data, but the results to open access, that would be a huge impact in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Ashley, especially for participating online. Good job. Let's give her a round of applause. And our last group, metadata management. So who do we do? Yes?
John Ralph, NCEI. So in addition to all of the barriers, mechanisms, and practices, et cetera, on the sheet that we got, we came up with a few. The need for vocabularies for different domains. They don't always exist, and people often use the same words to mean different things and different words to mean the same things. So having well-curated vocabularies and ontologies can be a barrier. Again, the needs of different communities don't always align, and that can impact the metadata and how it's represented, and can be a barrier. And of course, communication, because, well, engineers talking to scientists have some trouble, and any given group talking to any other given group might also be a barrier. So need a lot of communication to break down those barriers. Mechanisms for incentives, we came up with a couple example success cases could be a good mechanism. If you can show somebody the success that has been achieved by some other groups, maybe they would be willing to do the same thing themselves and maybe enjoy that same success. And then credit and citation, I think that's been brought up by a couple of other groups here, so I don't have much to add there. As far as good enough practices, living community-supported vocabularies are things that seem to be working pretty well. The example of GCMD and others were given. And as far as the impacts of open science, more people using the data, that's good. The improved reproducibility of data sets through more complete metadata, and linking the publications to the data, to the software, and other artifacts through the metadata, PIDs, that sort of thing. And all of that can lead to cost savings, especially if you have example projects to follow with good metadata, try to do the same thing and save some money there. The ability to produce educational material that uses open access to data through Jupyter Notebooks, that sort of thing, that was seen to be a positive impact. And also the ability to use metadata to inform responsible use of the data, what you can, and theoretically then, what you cannot expect to reasonably do with the data set. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, we're near the end of our workshop session, and we have one more Slido. Okay. And keep in mind, all of those who want to partake as a co-author will be sending out the abstract in about 6 days, maybe a little shorter than that. It has to be submitted by July 31st, so you will have access to it. We're just going to use a lot of this input. We already have a draft version, so we'll just be incorporating some more of this content from this workshop today. And if you're interested in being part of that, please highlight your name in the document, and then we will make sure to email it to you. So last Slido question. Let's see, after this. Okay. Not bad. 4 is pretty good. Okay. Did you have any comments to wrap up? Well, thank you all for your participation. We look forward to collaborating with you, and we do hope that you join the Open Science Cluster. It happens, is it the third, when do we do it? Third Thursday? Oh, gosh, none of us know. It's in our calendar, but we can send it all for you to join us.
Every last Tuesday of the month. Yeah.
Oh, gosh, it's not even on Thursday. Okay. Okay, on a Tuesday. So we can send that. Yes, question?
Sorry, that's Eastern time. Noon Eastern.
Yeah. Any more questions? All right, well, let's give you all a round of applause for participating. Thank you so much.